Robert Frost was born March 26, 1874, in San Francisco. His parents were William Prescott Frost, Jr. and Isabel Moody. They were both teachers. His father died when Frost was only 11, and his mother then moved him to New England.
Frost became interested in poetry while he attended Lawrence, Massachusetts High School.
In 1892, Frost attended Dartmouth College and later enrolled at Harvard, but he never earned a formal degree. After dropping out of college, Frost worked a variety of jobs, including farming, a mill hand, a journalist, a teacher, a cobbler, and an editor. Frost applied his work experiences to his poetry. My Butterfly was Frost's first professional poem and was published in a New York newspaper, The Independent.
Frost married Eleanor White in 1892. She became a major influence in Frost's poetry. Frost was also influenced by his children as well. Unfortunately, many of his children died. His first son, Eliot, died at 3. His second child, Eleanor, died 2 days after birth. His daughter, Marjorie, died at 29, and his daughter, Carol, died at 38. Frost and his wife, Eleanor, moved to England after their farm failed. In England, Frost met Edward Thomas, Rupert Brooke, and Robert Graves. These three poets would influence Frost's work as well. Frost also met Ezra Pound while in England. He promoted and helped publish Frost's work. In 1915, Frost returned to the U.S. By now he had published A Boy's Will and North of Boston. As he continued to produce his works, he became more and more famous. Frost received a Pulitzer Prize in 1924, 1931, 1937, and 1943, coming to a total of 4 Pulitzer Prizes. Frost had many influences for his poems, such as landscapes, people, speech, and everyday life.
His poem Out Out was most likely inspired by his time as a farmer or mill hand. The buzzsaw snarled and rattled in the yard, and made dust and dropped stove-length sticks of wood, sweet-scented stuff when the breeze drew across it, and from there those that lifted eyes could count 5 mountain ranges, one behind the other, under the sunset far into Vermont, and the saw snarled and rattled, snarled and rattled. As it ran light or had to bear a load, and nothing happened, day was all but done. Call it a day, I wish they might have said, to please the boy by giving him the half hour, that a boy counts so much when saved from work. His sister stood beside him in her apron, to tell them supper. At the word, the saw, as if it meant to prove saws know what supper meant, leaped out at the boy's hand, or seemed to leap. He must have given the hand, however it was, neither refused the meeting but the hand, half in appeal, but half as if to keep the life from spilling. Then the boy saw it all, since he was old enough to know, big boy, doing a man's work through a child at heart. He saw all was spoiled. Don't let him cut my hand off. The doctor, when he comes, don't let him, sister. So, the hand was already gone. The doctor put him in the dark of ether. He lay and puffed his lips out with his breath. And then, the watcher at his pulse took a fright. No one believed. They listened to his heart. Little, less, nothing. And that ended it. No more to build on there. And they, since they were not the one dead, turned to their affairs.
This poem describes a young boy working on a farm who accidentally cuts his hand off with a buzzsaw. The boy was excited for dinner, and this caused him to be careless. The end of the poem describes the doctor not being able to help the boy. After the boy passes, everyone returns to work with little sympathy for the boy. This describes the working life of the children. Frost might have been trying to create child labor laws. Critics say Frost was trying to make the reader think about the inevitability of death. I've been one acquainted with the night. I've walked out in rain, and back in rain. I've outwalked the furthest city light. I've looked down the saddest city lane. I've passed by a watchman on his beat. and drop my eyes, unwilling to explain. I've stood still and stopped the sound of feet, when far away an interrupted cry came over houses from another street, but not to call me back or say goodbye. And further still, at an unearthly height, one luminary clock against the sky proclaimed the time was neither wrong nor right. I've been one acquainted with the night.
This poem tells the story of a man who struggles with his own depression. The mood is very dark and depressing. Night is used to represent depression, sadness, and struggles. Critics say that this poem has a large underlying message, in which Frost opens up to the readers and tells them that his life has been hard. The poem is thought to describe a man who can't sleep and to try to clear his mind goes for a walk. It is modernism because it applies to the hard times many people were facing during the Depression.
Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and by one traveller long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth, then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that the passing there had worn them really about the same, and both that morning equally lay, it leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence, some roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference.
This is Frost's most famous poem. It uses paths to represent choices. The author sees two paths that people have traveled down. He chooses one and wishes that one day he could return and take the other path, meaning he wishes he could return and see what the other choice would have led to. Critics point out a major misunderstanding in the poem. Then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps a better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that, the passing there had warned them really about the same. If you read that line, critics point out that the roads were equally taken. Frost does not talk about taking the road less traveled by, but instead talks about how he wishes he could see how both choices would have played out. And the last line says that he will say that he took the road less traveled by, but he himself won't believe it. This is modernism because it deals with an individual having to make choices and how choices will affect the rest of our lives. Frost was unique in the way he used traditional poetry styles to write about modernist topics. He used rhyme schemes and structured poems, unlike many of the other poets of his time.
Personification, the attribution of a personal nature or character to an inanimate object or abstract notions, especially as a rhetorical figure. Frost uses personification in the poem Out by describing the buzzsaw as a person.
In his poem Acquainted with the Night, Frost uses alliteration, which is the repetition of initial sounds in neighboring words.
In The Road Not Taken, Frost uses an ABAAB rhyme scheme, which is rhymed words at the end of lines.
What do you think the poem meant?
I think the poem meant that the author had two choices to make and he had to pick one.
Do you think the poet took the road less traveled?
Yes, I do believe the poet took the road less traveled and he took the less popular choice.
Are you surprised that this is not true and that the poet actually had two equally traveled roads?
Yes, I was surprised and I didn't catch that.
Is this modernism?
Yes, I believe it is and it shows an individual making a tough choice.